Yeah, so I took the south side route in Nepal to climb Everest, and it starts with the trek into base camp, which is about 9 or 10 days. And we start at a place called Lukla, and then we get to Everest base camp. And from there, we start our acclimatization process. So it's a 2-month expedition. So we start by doing our rotations. So we'll climb up to Camp 2, and then we'll come back down, and we'll do about 2 rotations heading up to Camp 3 before we will actually go for the summit push. So when we left the last camp, I felt quite strong on summit day, even with the altitude. I felt pretty good, and we were moving at a good pace. And yeah, it's pretty surreal after all the years of preparation and planning and training to think it all comes down to this one day. This is the summit day. So that was an amazing feeling, and I had a really good climb. And I remember we got up onto the south summit, which is maybe 2 hours from the actual summit, and you can see that last little ridge line. And it was about then that I knew I was going to summit, and then when I actually did, it was quite surreal to actually be standing there. It's mixed emotions when you get to the summit, those last few steps, and then actually standing there, a lot of things go through your head. And I was just thinking to sort of take it all in, and you kind of have to keep telling yourself, I'm actually on the summit of Everest, and there's almost disbelief in a way. But yeah, it's mixed feelings because you're really excited and you're happy, but at the same time you know that you've still got to get back down, and that is equally as challenging in some ways. You're more exhausted, and so I was also just making sure I kept focus for the climb back down as well. You've got just a tiny little section, but you can see the prayer flags that are constantly up there, as you're getting there. And so you've got this little section, so it's sort of one person at a time on the summit. And so I sort of sat up there for a bit and took some photos, but we could see some other climbers coming up from Tibet, and you can see on one side you've got all of Tibet, and on the other side you've got all of Nepal. So it was pretty amazing. We had about 20 minutes to be on the summit, and then we really had to get back down and make sure that we didn't run out of oxygen or time or anything like that. So yeah, it was pretty much take some photos, and then before we left I took a moment to just take it all in, and then it was time to go down. I think probably my toughest day wasn't even necessarily a really steep section. It's one that I had done before in my rotation. So we were going from base camp to Camp 2, skipping Camp 1, which was a really long day. You start going through the Khumbu icefall first thing in the morning, and then it gets quite hot toward the end of the day, and it's a long day. So that was probably my toughest day, where I really had to mentally push through. And then, after that I felt really good the last 3 days, toward the summit. To get through those challenging moments, I think 1, I was just so focused on the goal, and 2, I was so grateful that the climb was going ahead and we had this opportunity this year. And I think I just recognized that opportunity was here, and I did feel ready regardless of how hard it was. I just sort of pushed through in my own head and said, this is what I really want to do. Probably the most afraid and nervous I was when we were going up for our summit push the day we were leaving base camp. So like I said, we start up through the Khumbu icefall, which is the most dangerous section on the mountain, and as you get into the later stages of the season it gets warmer, and so the icefall is even less stable than when we started. So we were heading up at 2 a.m. And all you can see is your head torch, and it's pitch black, but we could hear a lot of avalanches happening around us. And so you don't really know how close they are, but they're quite loud. And so that was probably the one time where I felt really afraid, but I wanted to go for the summit, so we kept pushing on. So our team, we sort of all climb together, but we climb at our own pace as well. So everybody has a Sherpa for the summit push that they work with, and so it was my Sherpa and I, but I also summited with another woman named Melanie, who was on my expedition. We were around the same time, but effectively it was my Sherpa and I climbing together. The Sherpas are full-time climbers, most of them. Often they'll start out as a cook on expeditions, and then eventually they work their way up to being climbing Sherpas. And most of our Sherpas were from a village called Kumjung, which we actually stayed at before we on the trek into base camp, because it's in the same valley, and they took us into their home as well, and we got to see sort of how they live and everything. But yeah, they're full-time climbers, and my Sherpa was incredibly experienced as well, and so it was great to climb with him. I think it's really hard to pick what the best parts were, even though, you know, the icefall is really dangerous. I actually quite enjoyed climbing in there, and it's something I've imagined 100 times. So, but I think, yeah, just to be, you know, on the Lhotse face, that once again I've imagined so many times, to actually be standing there at each point, it felt really good. And yeah, I mean, more than anything is obviously the summit is always the highlight of the expedition. But yeah, I quite enjoyed climbing through the icefall as well. It's good to be back. You know, it was a good but long expedition, but at the same time, I can't believe it's over still. You know, after all the years of planning and training. But yeah, I think your perspective changes every time you come back from an expedition. I don't think you can go through something like that and still be the same. So yeah, my perspective has changed on a lot of things, and right now I'm just really happy to be home. I'm aiming to do the 7 summits next, which is sort of an extension of Everest, obviously Everest being one of them, but that's the highest point on each of the 7 continents, and I would have 5 to go, so that's sort of my aim through this year and next, hopefully, is to complete those. So at the moment I'm working on a book as well with Penguin Publishing, which is set to be released in September, and so we've been working on it for a couple of years now, and this expedition, the Successful Summit, is going to be the final chapter, so it kind of goes through everything from Kokoda right through to Everest, so yeah, I'm looking forward to that.